star this season. Tonight, he showed the world what he could do.
My God, a freshman.
An extra gear for the freshman. Touchdown. And the freshman is off. Foot race. They're looking at shoe bottoms and nothing else. Into the end zone. Touchdown. The freshman just ran it back to Philadelphia.
All right, guys, welcome to the Future Freshman Podcast. Welcome to a special edition of the Future Freshman Podcast. This week, I was able to head to Chapel Hill. Of course, you saw the spring game report. I was able to visit the UNC spring game, and I was able to get an interview in with Don Callahan from Inside Carolina. And I was also able to kind of sit down with Cory Smith, who's the editor there at Pack Pride, and they both work for 24/7 Sports, and kind of get both of their takes on who are they liking this season for both the NC State Wolfpack and the North Carolina Tar Heels here in the ACC, and seeing who might stand out, maybe if there's a freshman or a recruit that's coming in next year that they can really see breaking out, and who you should kind of focus on as we move into the new year. Both of them have some experience in fantasy as well. So it's good to have their perspective, but see a recruiting perspective as well, and seeing like a full picture type situation. So that's what I wanted to bring to you guys today. And kind of when you listen in and kind of watching the video and stuff like that, I wanted you to kind of focus on the key takeaways there. So you're not only, prepared here come redraft, but also for dynasty, if there's a guy that you need to pick up, trade for, because we want to do the full spectrum, not just the freshmen all the time, but I did want to add, a few of the freshmen in the incoming recruiting class, stuff like that coming in, just so we did have a take on the Future Freshman Podcast as well. So the first one's going to be a Don Callahan. Once again, sorry for the shaky one. It was a windy day. Had Don's daughter be able to record. So thank you, Don's daughter, for holding the camera for us and doing that as well. So if you are watching, that's why it's a little shaky. But we, the other one with Cory Smith was, done just by recording and stuff like that. So but you'll be able to hear both of them. So if you are listening, you'll be able to hear both on the audio. If you're watching here on YouTube, like I said, a little bit shaky in the first interview. But other than that, it was a really fun time. Got a lot of great key points and stuff like that you guys are really going to like. So just kind of sit back, listen, or watch. And we'll, at the end of this segment, we'll have a big fish, small pond for you guys. So that way we end off strong. You guys enjoy the video, and you guys have a blessed week. Hey guys, welcome to the Future Freshman Podcast. Cool day today. We're at the spring game here, 2022 in North Carolina, here at Keenan Memorial State. I'm joined by Don Callahan here of Inside Carolina 24/7 Sports. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. You had a little bit of experience in the fantasy football world. I believe you were a former champion of CFF, if I'm not mistaken, when I was under a different umbrella.
Maybe. I can't remember. That was a couple of seasons ago.
It was. But Don is crafted in both fantasy and as well as in the recruiting field. Don, just give him a little quick synopsis of what you do for 24/7 Inside Carolina and some of your duties that you do on a daily basis. That's it.
I mean, for the most part, my title is football recruiting analyst. But I mean, that's basically whoever North Carolina is recruiting, I'm following, trying to figure out where they're going, evaluations of those guys. I'm always talking to recruits, always going to 7-on-7s, always going to games, watching a whole lot of film. I mean, basically from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed, it's a whole lot of football for me.
That's not a bad thing, especially if you love it as well. So today there's a lot of questions that are coming into the season. There's a few position battles that are going to happen here, basically, especially through the spring and summer. There's a lot that holds weight in the identity of the team. So what are some of the positions that you're probably most excited for as far as developing as we're going here into the spring game and moving forward into the summertime?
Well, I think the obvious one, the easy one, is the quarterback situation with Drake May and Jacoby Criswell. And I mean, there's a couple other guys in there also, but it comes down to those two guys. So that's what I'm most interested in. I haven't been to any practices. My counterparts have been, but from what it seems like, it's pretty neck and neck. But maybe Drake May has a little bit of an edge in that department. Yeah. Other than that, you want to look at running backs. Exactly. I know we're going to talk about freshmen here. George Pettaway is a guy who, if you're on Twitter, you've seen some of his highlights have kind of leaked out of just some of his runs that he's had. Yeah. Andre Green's not on campus yet, but he's a guy I'm really curious to see what sort of playing time he gets this fall. So those are the main ones.
Yeah, for sure. So in your thoughts of the 2022 class, as far as such a huge rank, 11th nationally, of course we're second in the ACC behind certain teams. Who do you think could show production in year one? So would it be a guy like a George Pettaway, or once Green comes on campus, do you think he could secure a real wide receiver too? I do hear things about guys stepping up like a J.J. Jones and a British Brooks who seems to have a good grasp on the running back position. What's your thoughts on a freshman playing year one and actually doing a good job this year for Carolina?
So statistically speaking, freshmen don't make as much of an impact as people think.
Right.
A lot of that is they don't have the training. The high school strength and conditioning is not on par with college at all, even at the best high schools. And then a lot of the guys that they're competing against have multiple years in those systems, so they have a little bit of an edge. An opportunity may not necessarily be there if you're behind a starter or a 2-year starter. I mean, the odds are stacked against you hugely. Right. But the two guys I mentioned, George Pettaway and also Andre Green, they step into situations where there is a little bit of opportunity. Yes, there are upperclassmen who are ahead of them who have been in a college football strength and conditioning program. But as I mentioned, George Pettaway has shown in some of the clips on Twitter that that he definitely should get on the field. How much is to be seen.
Right. So going back, not last year, but the year before, Coach Longo, did a system of running backs where we had Javonte Williams and, of course, Michael Carter, both NFL starters now as well. Last year we saw the transfer of Ty Chandler, who took on a leadership role immediately, which is a rare occasion here at Carolina for sure. So do you think Coach Longo would want to go back into a two-system back to have like a guy like a British Brooks, a bigger back first, and George Pettaway as like the speed back situation, or do you think they're looking for more of a bell cow type situation, or is that just not a thing anymore?
I think most you want to get a rotation going because you want fresh legs. That's a position you're always getting beat up on every single play when you touch the ball, so you want fresh legs. I think the players will dictate whether that's a 2-back rotation or a 3-back rotation. I think British Brooks didn't come back to sit on the bench, so I think he's a guy who's going to be out there for sure. And then you have a guy like Caleb Hood, who was playing early on last season as a true freshman, got injured, and then ended up burning his red shirt, even though that wasn't completely necessary. So I think you got to think that he's a guy who could get on the field. We mentioned George Pettaway. I think he's in the conversation. And there's guys like DJ Jones and also Elijah Green, who Coach Matt Brown spoke highly of in his press conference the other day. So there's definitely some names. It's just a matter of how many of those, is it 2 or is it 3 that just step up and just basically make it impossible for UNC to keep them off the field?
From what I'm hearing, whether it's Tarto Illustrated or just people, talking stuff like that, there's over 7 backs. So there's got to be where we might see some people transfer out and stuff like that. Yeah. Do you think we keep 4? Do we keep 5 backs? What does Coach Brown usually
I think Brown,
do for the most part?
Brown wants to keep all of them if he can. Right. But the nature of it is that besides British Brooks, the majority of those guys are sophomores or younger.
Right.
So if you fall back pretty deep in this depth chart, the odds of you surpassing those guys next year or the year after are not very good. So if your goal is to get on the field, to put together an NFL resume, then transferring is going to happen. And a lot of that depends on how many guys end up playing and what kind of transpires during the season.
All right, so you're the guy that told me about Justin Knowlton. Maybe he took an extra year from the time that we talked about it, but he did make his way on the field, right?
He did.
We do have Antoine Green, the super senior, coming back to play, so I'm assuming that he'll probably get a lot of reps, along with our buddy Josh Downs, who's our wide receiver 1 here in North Carolina. Who do you see possibly standing out? Is it a guy like J.J. Jones, or could we see a guy like an Andre Green Jr. finally jump up in this mix? I know we kind of talked about it a little bit, but what's your thought process on the depth chart before we see spring game and summer come along?
I'm a big fan of J.J. Jones. He played in a system in high school that was a pass-heavy system at Myrtle Beach High School. Big, tall guy is exactly what UNC wants, a vertical threat. Andre Green, as I mentioned, didn't get in the spring. I think that puts him a little bit behind. It's going to make it difficult for him. But maybe J.J. Jones is the guy early. The thing with J.J. was last year, he didn't play in the very beginning and kind of worked his way on. I could see that sort of playing out for Andre Green. Maybe Green starts to play a little bit sooner in the season than what JJ did last season. But I think you always got to, if you're looking at this from a probability standpoint, you always got to favor the upperclassmen.
Absolutely. So what are going to be your big takeaways from the game today, watching the spring game? What are you looking forward as far as like reporting and analysts and stuff like that? What are some of the key takeaways that you're trying to bring, with the spring game today?
I'm going to focus on the younger guys to see which ones kind of stand out, make plays, that sort of thing. It's so hard because not everybody is going to play, and you're playing against your teammates, and so it's like Mac Brown said the other day. It's like, well, if the running game looks good, then you're kind of mad at the defense. If the running game looks bad, then you're mad at the offensive line and the running back. So it's such a hard thing to kind of take too much from. So you're just looking for big plays and to see who's making an impact and maybe has taken a step up from what they look like from last year. And then also the freshmen, to see how they have adjusted, where they're playing at, who they're playing with, and how they're kind of feeling in the college game.
Yeah, I definitely see that. We're definitely looking forward to QB battle, the RB battle, especially wide receiver, just to see how these guys are kind of playing out and things like that in particular. So the 2023 class that's coming up, I know you're already, right in the mix of it. I see, retweeting and posting with the guys that are coming to visit, things like that as well. So we're already 54th. We have Tad Hudson, the 4-star from Cornelius. So he's already there. We're already in the national scene as well. With guys like Noah Rogers and Javante Vereen, who's at Havelock High School right down the road from where I live, and things like that are going to rival schools like NC State and others like Duke that are doing it. Do you think there's a lot more pressure on North Carolina to succeed, in the 2023 class, or do you think because the reputation that it had the past few years that we're going to be kind of just fine as we're moving along into the 2023-2024 class?
Well, I think this year in-state is not as strong as it has been. Really, well, last year wasn't very strong either, but before that, that I guess it was the 2021 class was a historical class, and so there's been a drop-off. Last year, UNC was able to dip into Virginia, which had a very strong class, particularly in the Tidewater area. It was able to pull out a lot of guys out of there. Also, Zach Rice was another guy that they were pulling. Andre Green, we talked about those guys in Virginia. This year, Virginia's not as strong also, so UNC is having to step into Georgia, step into Florida to try to pull some guys out, and that's not as easy as pulling guys out of your in-state territories and out of Virginia because of the competition in Georgia and Florida. So that's going to take a little bit more time. It takes time from a standpoint of getting guys on campus and seeing where you're at with those guys. You have to offer a lot more. So you've seen UNC has offered a lot more guys in this class than they have in the prior two, and people are getting frustrated because there's only one commitment. But as I said, things take time, and I think we'll have a better idea of where things sit with a lot of these guys, what this class could potentially look like heading into June. And then June will obviously be a big month to determine just what the makeup of this class ultimately is.
Yeah. So just kind of add on that real quick, and we'll go on the last question. So there's a lot of noise, especially Josh Paisley, late kick and stuff like that. He's saying that North Carolina is one of those guys that can emerge to be a national championship contender, especially in the next few recruiting classes if everything goes as planned. Are you in the same mindset that now, without the big expectations and all the pre-rankings and stuff like that, now Mac and Coach Longo has a little bit more leeway to kind of get the team ready and stuff like that to be able to kind of compete, for an ACC championship, possibly move into a playoff scenario?
Well, there's definitely talent on the roster, particularly on defense, where the defense didn't play as well. It was so young last year. And so with an extra year, those guys are naturally going to be better. And I think the classes that Mac Brown, the thing I think people forget is that the past couple seasons, with the exception of Hal, who signed during that transition class, which I don't really count too much, the majority of those guys were Fedora's players. And so now Mac's slowly kind of injecting some of his own players, and it's going to take some time for those guys to develop. And I think we're going to see some of that development this season and next season for sure. So yeah, there is definitely the potential for North Carolina to be pretty good. And the crazy thing is that it could be the defense that leads this program in the next couple of seasons, not the offense.
And that's pretty cool because defense wins championships, whether you're in the NFL level or in the NCAA. All right, last question. The NIL has made its way into the college scene as well. You're a guy that played college fantasy with me as well. So with the stuff like NCAA, the football game coming back, the guys getting name, image, and likeness, so they get a little bit, as well. The news of Nico, who I can't pronounce his last name, but he's gone to Tennessee, who's on a NIL type deal. Do you see, fantasy football in general for the college scene kind of expand into an almost NFL type level of popularity? I know it might need a little bit more exposure and things like that, but do you think it has the capability now with the NIL backing and the transfer portal and things like that to make it a little bit more interesting?
Yeah, I think it's only going to help that. It's difficult. The NFL fantasy football is such a crazy level that it's difficult for any sport to reach that level. But I think you'll see college football raise higher because you don't have to worry so much about the name, image, likeness stuff being some sort of court lawsuit sort of thing. so you can see some more advertisements, some more benefits for the college students, and it become a little bit more acceptable. Also, these guys who are getting these name, image, likeness deals are being spokesmen for different products. You see them more, and then that obviously kind of translates to being recognized on the fantasy football scene, so people will be more likely to kind of join in. Because I think the main thing with fantasy football is that you have that player for that season, and I'm talking about the NFL. You know who that player is before you drafted him. In college football, that might not necessarily be the case for the casual fan, and then NIL will help that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Don, I want to thank you for coming on to the podcast. Can you tell the guys where you're at on Twitter and where they can find you, and just anything you got coming up as far as the scoop and things like that?
Well, you can find everything on Inside Carolina. All my stuff is on Inside Carolina. But you can follow me on Twitter at Don Callahan IC. But like I said, everything for me is on Twitter, on the message boards. Feel free to come on and chat.
I appreciate it. And I'm Brandon T. Sanders. You can find me at CFF University. Of course, if you go to campusofcan.com, you can find all of our articles, videos, and things like that going on. Thank you guys for listening in, and we appreciate Don for coming on, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace. All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Future Freshman podcast. We have a very special guest this time. Of course, this is Cory Smith from Pack Pride, affiliated with 24/7 Sports. Cory Smith, welcome to the Future Freshman podcast, buddy.
Thanks, Brandon. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, I'm glad you could join us, man. So for the listeners and the people that are going to be watching, tell the viewers and watchers what you kind of do there with Pack Pride, and your like daily task and kind of what you focus on for the year for the most part.
So I cover a little bit of everything. My main job is being the editor of Pack Pride overall. So anything that goes through to the site, I have to read over it, make sure it's there. But I also cover, football, basketball. I was telling you beforehand, I'm currently, if you see all the red behind me, I'm actually at a NC State baseball practice right now, getting ready to do a couple of interviews for some feature stories on that. So do a little bit of everything, recruiting. Obviously, Michael Clark is more of our football recruiting guy, but I do basketball recruiting, and then I do football, extensively when it comes to covering the team as well.
Yep. So I wanted to reach out to you because you have some fantasy takes, but of course you're always busy, and that's the cool thing to see on Twitter. You're like at football, and then the next thing you know, boom, you're right over to basketball, talking about that over on the podcast. So Cory here has done some NFL fantasy. He actually used to work for DraftKings, so I just heard off the air as well. So he's dabbled in some college fantasy football as well. We might pull Cory into some of the CFF stuff this year. We'll see how it goes. So it depends on his schedule and what he's able to do. But Cory, so let's start off with the inevitable. Let's start with the spring game because there's some really good takeaways, and I know you had some stuff to say as far as an article. But from your standpoint, just watching and stuff like that, how do you think the Wolfpack are looking in general as far as the team and how they're coming along, and what you're seeing with the newer recruits kind of coming in, at least for this year, kind of like an Allen at running back and things like that? What is your take here from the spring game, and what you like?
Yeah, I mean, from the spring game, it's, the biggest takeaway, and I've talked about it multiple times, just the fact that Devin Leary, still looks every bit part of, being one of the best quarterbacks, not only in the ACC, but potentially in the country. I just feel like he's so kind of, not talked about. Like, he's just so unheralded. Like, we've seen, people on the ACC network talking about it because they get a chance to see him, day in and day out, and get a better chance of, figuring out where he's at. Some are, being looked at as, potential QB1 in the ACC, and obviously, guys like Tyler Van Dyke, and I know some, still on the DJ Uyunglele train, and obviously, the guy down at Louisville right now is pretty good too.
Yeah,
so
Callahan's good.
So there's a lot of different people that can kind of take that number one spot, and Devin Leary, 26 of 34, 355 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. The 1 interception was on a little bit of an underthrown ball. Great interception by Sean Brown, who's a guy that's been standing out. So that was the biggest takeaway I had from it. But if you're talking about guys that you want to know about going into the season, obviously the veterans, as far as the wide receivers are concerned, Devin Carter and Thayer Thomas are back this season. Those are going to be guys that are going to be leaned on even more heavily this season. But if you're looking for a breakout wide receiver, like Porter Rooks has it written all over him.
Yeah,
he's the
I
guy
like him a lot.
He's the guy to me that has had that potential the last 2 years since he's been with NC State, but really hasn't had a chance to shine. And I think now, everything that we've heard, and we got to see it a little bit in the spring game, is Thayer Thomas is going to probably be flexed a little bit more to the outside. So he's probably going to take over a little bit more of that Devin Carter role. Devin Carter goes into the Emeka Mezzi role. And now that leaves Porter Rooks as the guy at the slot receiver. And when I watched him this past week, he caught the one touchdown, only I think 3 receptions for like 19 yards or something like that. But they just, there wasn't really or 2 receptions for 19 yards. Wasn't a ton, of really targeting in on one guy in particular. There was a bunch of different guys that got to eat. I think out of those 26 receptions, it was like 10 of them, 10 different guys. So we didn't really see, anybody really emerge that spot. But yeah, I mean, between him, Anthony Smith is another guy that I think has a really good shot of being, a big piece to the puzzle when it comes to the wide receiver rotation that we'll see this year. And then one guy that I wouldn't count out is Keon Lassane too. Like he's a guy that kind of came on late in the season, and I think he has a chance to take over that kind of secondary slot receiver position that you saw Porter Rooks have last year. So, how much does he kind of fight for that spot, and how much does he get in there? We saw him play really well in this past week, and he has really good chemistry with Devin Leary. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him step up. As far as the younger guys are concerned, everybody in that running back room right now is just fighting for snaps because you lose Donovan Knight, you lose Ricky Person from last year. Mm-hmm. While I know a lot of people are kind of comparing it to the UNC situation of the year prior,
a little bit,
those guys were not nearly as productive during their final year as guys like Javonte and Michael Carter Williams. Like those two were, or Michael Carter. Sorry, I keep going. I don't know why I said Michael Carter Williams.
It's all good.
Those two, both rushing for over 1,000 yards. NC State's running game really struggled at the end of last year, and I think because they now have guys that are better pass catchers out of the backfield in Jordan Houston and Demi Sumo and Michael Allen, who Michael Allen this past year was used almost exclusively by Rose High School as a wide receiver because they just wanted to get the ball in his hands. So between those 3 guys, you've got 3 really good pass catchers, and they really want to get the ball in Devin Leary's hands, let him, make the most of his opportunities. And when you put all 3 of those guys together, you've got a really good backfield that can not only run the ball pretty well, but also you have to be able to cover them. So the linebackers have to be able to be ready for that as well.
Yeah. So, we'll backtrack a little bit. So, we saw your take, you're there at the pro day. So Amizi and a few others there, but the scouts were really loving what they saw out of Devin Leary. And I keep telling people that you got to give Devin Leary his flowers. I know that's like a wrestling reference, but it's like, give the man the credit that he is deserving. Just because I think he's such a well-rounded quarterback and he's excelled every single year that he's played. A lot of people are like, Will Levis will be like QB3 behind CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. I honestly think Devin Leary has got what it takes to be the QB3. He might, transcend if he keeps it going. It's going to be hard to beat out a guy like CJ Stroud and Bryce Young, these guys with Heisman contention. But Devin Leary could surprise a lot of people. And in fantasy, they're like, they took him like the 30th quarterback. Well, that's starting to change now. So finally, people are starting to hear us, whether it's at campusofcan.com where I'm at or some other websites that are really big in fantasy. They're like, hey, Devin Leary, this kid coming up from NC State, you should probably watch out for him. He might be somebody that might play at the next level. And you were there firsthand. So scout wise, they love the deep ball. They love what the consistency. They like, for the most part, the accuracy that Devin Leary is able to bring. So when it comes to the running backs, we saw the Jordan Houston bust out a big run, was able to take off. I remember retweeting, while you're there at the spring game, like, hey, Jordan Houston's doing his thing with the ones. But we didn't see much pass catching. Do you think it was just a circumstance of the spring game that Houston didn't get a lot of looks as far as catching? And do you think that, like you were saying, do you think he still gets that opportunity? And do you see Sumo as pretty much the Pearson type role here this year type situation?
Yeah, I mean, when I look at the backfield, I mean, this past weekend, yeah, obviously they didn't throw the ball as much to the running backs. Honestly, I mean, they really threw it to the tight ends a lot, and that's another position that I think we haven't got into that. I'll talk about the running backs, but the tight ends are really probably the guys like Trent Penix and Chris Tootle. Those might be guys that you need to look at, as far as sleepers for if you're just playing an ACC league or you're playing all across the country. Like, you want to be looking at those guys because they were guys that really stepped up last year. Both of them, I think, had 3 touchdowns, but had, some pretty good yardage. And Trent Penix really came on strong down the stretch last year. So he'll probably be, the guy in that H-back role this year and get some good receptions. But, when you look at the running backs, yeah, I mean, I think one of the big reasons why they really throw it to them a lot this past weekend was because They wanted to get them the reps, running the ball. They wanted to get them the opportunity. Also, they only played one half. So, I don't have the stats in front of me, but I know both of them had a catch. I'm pretty sure Jordan Houston had like one catch for 17 yards or something like that. So,
Yeah.
it's a pretty decent chunk yardage, especially when you think about the fact that he only had 6-7 carries. So that's not going to be your typical game basis. So I wouldn't really put much stock into, what they did in the spring game.
Right.
We'll see, early on in the season. And I think we'll get a better idea once they get to that ECU game. And, maybe guys like that are still available in fantasy because maybe they don't even get drafted. So you might want to find out, hey, who's really kind of, coming to the forefront for this offense. Whether it's if you're in a PPR league, maybe you want a guy like Demi Sumo, who's maybe a better pass catcher once we get to that point. But Jordan Houston, I think, if I'm putting stock in anybody, I would say Jordan Houston right now is probably going to be RB1. And then, maybe a guy like Demi Sumo is RB1A or RB1B,
Right.
So that's where I would put it at right now.
Yeah. So let's, transition to the tight ends. And when it comes to fantasy, what we remember is, of course, the Jalen Samuels era of the tight end / running back, and he was huge. So you could literally plug him at tight end, but often he ran RB. We saw Samuels then go, to Pittsburgh and actually was a running back, designated there. And then we had Angeline, who was actually really productive there at NC State. So we're looking for NC State to come back into the fold there. And we'll transition into some of the recruits there. I know you guys, talked about Tootle. And you talked about the other player. Sorry, I forgot the name. I'll let you. Yeah, Penix is there. And I know Penix is coming on strong. We do have a great, incoming class, especially 2023, just signing Javonte Farine, the 4-star here out of Havelock High School, right down the road from me, 20 minutes down the road. So I get to see him often. That kid went for over 1,000 yards in the tight end position of Havelock High. And Coach Wooten, I've had contact with him. The kid's an absolute monster. Do you see a guy like Farine coming in and, kind of lighting the world on fire? Do you think he kind of falls into the same role that NC State's had maybe in the past 2 or 3 years at the tight end position? Or do you see that being a focal point kind of moving forward?
Yeah, I definitely see him fitting into H-back role once he gets NC State. Now, how quickly he emerges, I think, is going to depend heavily on who's still there. Because, as of right now, if Trent Penix keeps emerging the way he does and he comes back for another year, Vereen probably has to wait a year behind him. Yeah. If Chris Tootle comes back and gets better as a blocker this year, maybe he emerges and has a bigger role at that true tight end position. So that really doesn't leave a lot of options for a guy like Vereen, who's right around that, 6'4", kind of frame where he's not really, a tall tight end like a Kerry Angeline. But, he has that playmaking ability, like you said, Jalen Samuels, Trent Penix. So I could definitely see him having a role early on. And then, emerging into one of the better players on the team. When you talk to Coach Wooten, all he says about his hands, the kid has just ridiculous hands. He makes really tough catches. And that's something that, in the past, NC State has sometimes struggled with when it comes to tight ends. You have guys that are playmakers, but it's how the hell do we get it in their hands? So you're hoping that they can continue to do that. And I think really, if you're looking at the tight end position right now and, for the foreseeable future, at least for this year and possibly next year, the guys you want to get, Chris Tootle and then Trent Penix. And we really saw, Fred Sebero this past weekend played really well. Yeah. I've heard a lot about him throughout camp, and obviously he's getting the opportunity right now. So that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be, a big role player this year. But getting a chance in spring camp with Trent Penix being out, Chris Tootle sitting out for the spring game, and I heard, the end of spring camp, that him getting a chance might help him in the future as well.
Yeah. So let's go into some of the recruiting stuff because I know you're kind of there both basketball and football basically because you cover everything because you're the editor. Yeah. But so, this past year, you guys ranked 64th overall in the nation, which is still top 100, pretty good. But this coming year, the 2023 class, which as a podcast, eventually our 2022, we move off of that. We start talking about the Arch Mannings and all these guys in the 2023 class coming up here soon. A guy on the radar is, I believe, Noah Rogers, who's the 4-star wide receiver. Right now, crystal ball, to you guys at NC State, that would be a great get. And I know Javonte, of course, Farine we're talking about, has said he's trying to, help be a recruit guy and, try to get out there and get Rogers on the team and a few others. And then there's, I believe, another wide receiver. I don't remember the name, but he's a kid, I think, locally around this area as well. That's doing really great too. So NC State's starting to stack on, the depth. We already see, a guy like Brooks. We got, we already got Carter and we got Thayer, so you guys are adding on to there as well. Do you guys think you could crack, the top 20, especially with the addition of Rogers and stuff like that, and kind of get in there nationally? Of course, guys right on the street, Chapel Hill went, 10th overall in the recruiting class. You guys got a Wake Forest who, picks up guys and stuff like that as well. Do you think NC State has a really good contention with this upcoming 2 recruiting classes to really, go for it? Because right now you guys, I think personally have a shot at the ACC championship. I personally do. And that's, coming from a guy that cheers for the Tar Heels. So it is what it is. But, right, you guys are looking really, really good and you're coming on strong. What do you think about this 2023 class and, how could it affect the Wolfpack moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a big class for them because, where this team was built, the foundation of it was in the 2019 and 2020 classes, for NC State, or 2018, 2019 classes. They grabbed a bunch of guys in those classes and were able to kind of build this foundation, whether it was guys like Devin Leary or, obviously the wide receivers they have now, Devin Carter. You think about the defensive side of the ball, and I mean, Thayer Thomas being a walk-on from that class too. So
amazing.
All those guys were built on that foundation, and that's what they're trying to do with this class. And tried to do it last year with that class, but the success came a little bit late.
Right.
A team like UNC heats up during the summer and grabs a bunch of kids, in that class, and then has a down year, but those kids stick around. They want to stay. And that's what you kind of hope for NC State is you're coming off a really successful year. You build upon that with a good class this year. And then if you can continue, if you can get to 10 wins this year, you can get to an ACC championship game, you build it for the following year. And that's what UNC was able to do based off of, that second to last year under Sam Howell. And now it's all right. Now we got to refresh and get back into it. So, but yeah, for State, when I look at the class, I mean, you mentioned Noah Rogers. Yeah, obviously a local kid, Rollsville. Initially, UNC was on him really hard, but he hasn't really talked a ton about them recently. His brother is a walk-on there. But for NC State, it really sounds like, the biggest competition right now is Ohio State. They're looking at like Penn State, Clemson, and Florida State are some teams that are still in on him. So I think, if they can get a player like that, a top, 75 player, I mean, that's huge. You're talking about one of the best wide receivers in the entire country, the best player right now in the state of North Carolina. That would be huge. And then I think the other one you might have been alluding to is either Nathan Leacock or Kevin Conception.
Leacock, that's it.
Yeah, Nathan Leacock is kind of one of these guys that's like right now probably not as as polished as a guy like Noah Rogers or even Kevin Conception, but he has a chance to have one of the highest ceilings in the entire state of North Carolina. Like that's why a lot of teams are suddenly getting on him right now, is because of how good of a prospect he looks like. If he adds a little bit more of that speed element to his game, which is something he's working on a lot this offseason. He's actually been working with former wide receiver TJ Graham out of NC State. So, and a guy that was a track star. So he's been working with him and trying to build upon that. So Nathan Leacock would be one. Kevin Conception's another slot receiver they've been looking at really hard. And trying to get, both them and UNC, I think are two teams that have been really going after him hard recently. And then, if I'm looking at the running back position, I mean, Dalen Smothers is another guy that, a lot of teams across the country have been going after. He's been taking several visits, not official visits, but FSU and Penn State are two of the teams that have been looking at him really hard too. So, those are the spots that you're looking to add. And I mean, you mentioned if we're not talking about just the just those offensive weapons. I mean, at the offensive line, they've already added Darian Rivers, a guy that I think has a chance to, by the end of it, be a 4-star player. 6'6", 255 pounds for an offensive lineman. He has a chance to keep growing and eventually get himself inside of the top 247 potentially down the line. And then there's other guys they're looking at on the offensive defensive side of the ball, but Sam Pendleton happens to be one of the best players in the country when it comes to the offensive line. So if they're able to add guys like that, that really could push them inside the top 25, possibly top 20, and be another foundation class for this team.
Absolutely. Do you by chance look at Bill Connolly's stuff like that, the S&P plus type stuff? So NC State ranked really, really high of returning players, and that's something at the college fantasy level that we look at. Bill Connolly, I know he's just doing it for college purposes in general, just like Phil Steele puts out his magazine. It's like the Bible to us, right? So we're looking at depth charts and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's cool to see a team like NC State really just get all their players back. And that brings me into my next segue is that they have all the pieces and Devin Leary's there, but we're looking to see who might be the heir apparent. So, we're looking at over at Carolina, Drake May versus Jacoby Criswell. Whoever wins, the other one might transfer out. Who's to say they might not go right down the street to Raleigh? Because there's a need. Leary's got that guy, but you have an MJ Morris, you have a few others there. Who do you think might grab the bull by its horns and kind of run with the twos and eventually become that heir apparent to Devin Leary? What's your thoughts on the quarterback position kind of moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, everything we've heard out of spring so far has been that Ben Finley has, looked really, really good. Obviously, they had a guy in Aaron McLaughlin. He transfers out. He went to Jacksonville State. That had really, from what we heard, had very little to do with NC State in general. It was just his mindset, wanted to go somewhere where he had a chance to produce and then potentially earn himself a spot and go on to be a starter at the next level. Ben Finley has been somebody that, for the last 3 years at NC State has slowly, kind of gotten better. And we really got a chance to see that, in the spring game. Numbers weren't great, but he was also playing on a white team that had very little offensive line help in front of him, playing against a defensive line that, even the second team defensive line for NC State has a chance to be one of the best in the ACC. So they have a lot of talent there. So he was struggling a little bit against the first team early on, and again with first team wide or third team, 14 wide receivers he's throwing to. So we saw him really look a lot better in the second half. Threw for 2 touchdowns, 2 pretty big touchdowns too. So everything we've heard out of camp has been that he's looked really good. MJ Morris, another promising prospect that you talked about. And then, Lex Thomas is a guy that'll come in next year too. He's expected to be an early enrollee, a guy that as of right now is around 6 foot tall. He's not really, the biggest quarterback, but, he's got an arm. Like the kid can make every throw.
He's doing well. They lead 11 from what I saw. As far as reports, he's doing fairly well at that level. So that's awesome.
He was one of the top 6. He was one of the top 6 guys at Elite 11, the Columbus Regional recently. So has a chance to move his stock up. And once he gets NC State, he'll come in, like I said, early January next year, and be a part of that that quarterback battle. If Devin Leary does leave after this year, Devin Leary does still have another year left. So we'll see.
He does, yeah.
I think ultimately he decides to go to the NFL.
The stock's looking good for Leary. Yeah,
I would say so. So, but if I had to put a handicap on it right now, I would probably still say Ben Finley. Okay. Because, he has stuck around for 3 years. He has been a guy that's been in the system. He knows Tim Beck's system inside and out. The last time that we really got a chance to see him in extended snaps was in 2020 after, he was kind of thrust into action because Devin Leary got injured the previous week. And he's playing against UNC in the, early in the second quarter and, didn't know the playbook by that point. Really, we talked to him afterwards. He's like, I just didn't know all the plays. That's why they took him back out. He had all the arm talent. Made a throw that should have been a touchdown against UNC, and it gets bobbled and intercepted off the hands of Chris Tootle, I believe, at the time. So this is a chance for him to really kind of emerge and take the reins of that QB2 right now, and eventually, QB1 down the stretch, over the next few years.
Yeah, for sure. All right, man. Well, I'll give you one more question. We'll get you out of here so you can get some baseball. So with the NIL in place, and you come from DraftKings as, previously employment, we kind of talked about that as well. Mm-hmm. You're familiar with fantasy football. Of course, NFL is such a huge thing, and there's plenty of money and commercial and stuff behind it. Do you think with the NIL, the return of the NCAA football game, name, image, and likeness, so these guys will actually get some money for being in the video game, things like that, do you believe the hype finally transcends college football? DFS is already helping with DraftKings and FanDuel. I'll throw this in there. Do you remember when FanDuel tried to do it before it was actually not allowed, and then they had to take college down? Do you remember doing that?
Yeah.
It was like a short thing, 2 months, and then boom, FanDuel was just like, nope, we don't got college anymore. My bad. I was like, man, I was trying to play Marquise Williams. What are you guys doing? Yeah. So, with that kind of emerging, do you think that college fantasy football, especially with, the hype behind college and the loyalty that it has, do you ever think that it can get to the level that NFL is? And do you think this is a start with NIL in place?
I definitely do. I think the only issue that the NCAA has, and, college football has, and college basketball in general, like any college sport, is the fact that you just have such a short shelf life on these players. So it does – I mean, the one benefit I will say is that it does create this, more of an unknown going into a regular season. So, and I think it does create more of like hey, I would much rather play DFS in college than I would, play actual full season in college.
Right.
So I think it does have a chance to, as college football gets better, at bigger college basketball, everything across the board, I think you have a chance to see, that daily become bigger because of the fact that you have so much unknown. So it's like you're drafting guys all based off of, little to no knowledge. I mean, maybe 1 year, maybe one full year. Whereas in NFL, you're looking at we're talking about, guys that have been there for 6-7 years. Hell, in the case of Aaron Rodgers, been there for over a decade. So it's you're not looking at the same background on these guys. So I think that's why, I think we'll eventually see, especially DFS get nearly as big as NFL and maybe, MLB and some other places like that.
Yeah, for sure. I still, just to slightly defend the redraft or like just the normal season where you're not doing like a dynasty. Like we can play dynasty because you can still get 2-3 years if you're lucky. Sometimes you might get the full 4 years out of a player in college, but at least in dynasty and NFL, you can, I could sit on Russell Wilson for like 5+ years and be good, that type of situation. So it is a little different, but the redraft does help because it's like a, cycling system. You only have to draft them once. And the cool thing about college is that the waiver wires is galore because some guy out of nowhere just shows up. And that's probably the coolest thing about college fantasy football versus probably the NFL, where the waiver wire is a little bit thinner and you're having to spin up all your fab and stuff like that. So that's where DFS is cool because you could just play on the week. You can look at the matchup like, NC State's playing Akron. Let me go ahead and slide Devin Leary rolling in basically and kind of do it, stuff like that. So I definitely can understand for sure. But yeah, I do think it's going to grow in general as a whole. And then that's just going to open up the more doors as well. And here at campusdecanton.com, it's actually a format where it's like you could play college and NFL at the same time. And then as they graduate, they move over to your NFL roster. So now guys that are just, even more diehards than even I was to just college fantasy football can actually play college and NFL. So it's pretty cool, the new formats that are coming out and, being able to kind of do that as well. Cory, I want to thank you for coming on to the show, man. Is there anything you'd like to plug? I want to give you the floor to, anyone that you can direct as far as the Twitter handle, Pack Pride, anything you want to support, man. Go ahead.
Yeah, if you want to follow me, it's at @Cory Smith, @RCORY, no E. As you see at the bottom, I'm sure, but at Cory Smith, and obviously for Pack Pride, any of our handles, it's at Pack Pride on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, any of those. Oh, we don't do TikTok. Sorry. I'm not into it, but so yeah, you can follow us at any of those. And then obviously packpride.com to check out all of the, as you said, the spring game takeaways and all of our content that we have up there every single day.
Absolutely. And of course, I'm Brandon T. Sanders. You can find me at CFF University. Of course, you can visit all of our work at campusdecanton.com. Of course, the Future Freshman podcast drops every Friday morning at 6 a.m. So make sure you listen out. Cory, thanks again for being on, and we will see you next time. Peace. All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Future Freshman podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed those interviews, and welcome to the Big Fish, Small Pond segment. Before we get started, just want to do some quick housekeeping. One, make sure you go into campusdecanton.com. Make sure you're checking out the website, all the new articles that are dropping, regardless if it's stock up, step down, anything to do with RBU articles that are coming out, the transfer portal articles that are coming out as well. Also, I highly suggest check out the different subscriptions that you have. My favorite being the NIL tier, of course, because you get access to everything as far as any of the guides that are dropping, as well as access to us on Discord, as well as being able to kind of check out all the tools that we have at your disposal to kind of help you out for your C2C, CFF, and Debbie League. So please go check that out as well. I do want to give a shout out to one of the new people that are collaborating with us, and that is CFB Winning Edge. Of course, that's Nicholas Ian Allen. You can find him over at Twitter at CFB Winning Edge. I highly advise you go check out the Patreon. It's patreon.com/CFB Winning Edge. He has probably the most accurate and precise depth charts for all of the NCAA, so I highly recommend that. We'll be using his stuff kind of going forward as far as a partnership, as far as depth charts, so I think it'll be a little bit more accurate. I wanted to bring you guys better depth charts and what he's seeing in the rankings and stuff like that. So having him at to help us out here on the podcast is big. So thank you once again, Nick, for helping us out. And once again, please go check out his Patreon at patreon.com/CFB Winning Edge. please go check it out. Even for a few dollars, you can have access to the same depth charts that we do here over at C2C. So please go check that out. All right, so let's talk about our big fish, small pond for this week. And that is one, Deandre Coleman. He is a 3-star prospect. 24/7 Sports Grade has him at 0.8748. So he's 6'2", 200 pounds. He's the 83rd overall wide receiver in the 22 class. So some of the accolades that he had, he did get to attend the Alabama-Mississippi All-Star game. He also played basketball, competed in track. So once again, we have a guy that's just a pure athlete. He ran an 11.42 100-yard and a 23.55 200-yard as a junior. Qualified for the Alabama State Track and Field Championships. And he played discus. He also jumped a 5'6". So, for going back to previous episodes, something that Mitch brings up, if this guy does all this type of stuff in the track, then he's got the talent and he's got the tangibles to kind of get it done. So here's something that I wanted to add moving forward is that Deandre Coleman got offers from a lot of P5 schools, not just G5. So some of these guys are Florida State, of course, Kansas, Maryland, Penn State, South Carolina, with all those big wide receivers kind of moving, Virginia and West Virginia. So he was not just looked at as G5 schools like East Carolina or Georgia State, but also he got these offers from the P5, and he decided to choose Coastal Carolina, which I think is pretty important. So per the depth chart, per CFB Winning Edge's Patreon, of course, we have Sam Pinkney, who has been transferred from Georgia State, been pretty productive over the past 2 seasons. He is likely the wide receiver one. He's also 6'4", so he's a huge threat on there. You do have Aaron Bedgood, who's a senior. He's a bit of a hybrid between RB and wide receiver. The junior Tyson Mobley, and also Deion Fountain, who's also a junior. So some of the stuff that I wanted to write up and bring to you guys' attention to check out is that other than Pinkney, who's the 24/7 composite of 0.8315, no one else is closest to DeAndre Coleman's rating and is coming in at CCU's highest rated wide receiver on the roster to date. He will likely have to bulk up 200 pounds, as you see in the picture, a little bit more lengthy, starting to build some muscle, but being at CCU, that should help out quite a bit as well. But if he keeps that and keeps the speed that he's already had through his track and field days and on basketball, it's very possible he could easily overtake Mobley and Fountain, who's only started 2 games total between the two so far. And Bedgood, who's the hybrid that we talked about, has only started 1 game. So these guys don't have a lot of, game management or game time frame in particular. So I feel like DeAndre Coleman is actually, pretty close to that of having the same type of pedigree and things like that, where he could kind of come in. So I think having Sam Pinkney at 6'4" and playing on one side, and then bringing in a guy like DeAndre Coleman, who's playing at 6'2" and bulking up as well, is great for one, Grayson McCall for the season on there, so it keeps his production up. But then we also could see a decent wide receiver too come in the fold early. Of course, remember the guys like Javon Hiley, Isaiah Likely. I'm pretty sure they're going to use their tight end spot too, and I'm big on Braden Bennett. He's probably one of my favorites as far as the guys that are now getting the shot at the first RB1 spot for sure. So Braden Bennett's definitely already on the radar, but Pinkney is probably wide receiver 1. But I do like DeAndre Coleman. I think he's going to possibly partake this year and start on there as well. Since he's so far down the thing, you could probably catch him in pretty later rounds of freshman and supplemental drafts that you're going to have. If it's just freshman, easily, you can catch in the back end, probably 5th or 6th round. You're not getting a lot of buzz on him right now. I'm just now kind of bringing this to people's attention. But DeAndre Coleman is one of those sleeper guys that remind me of a guy that could come in a wide receiver too. Nothing like the beast that is known as Matthew Golden, who I brought day one to the Big Fish Small Pond. But DeAndre Coleman's a guy I am excited about because of the opportunity, that he's not far behind the upperclassmen and already has a leg up as far as talent, pedigree, and then the tangibles to get it done. So 2 red zone threats, maybe Pinkney and Coleman. I wouldn't be surprised. So definitely look into that and check it out. Once again, I want to thank everyone as far as Don Callahan and for Cory to come on and do those interviews. And once again, thank you guys for listening in. I hope this was a great episode. If you guys like this one, let me know. Drop some reviews, some ratings and stuff like that. Leave me some comments down on YouTube. If you're really liking this format of interviews, I'll see if I can do some more and reach out to some of the other universities, especially in my area of North Carolina. So if I can do East Carolina, I can do, things like coastal, things like that. If I can get that rolling, if you guys be interested, let me know in the comments below, and then I'll see if I can make that happen for you guys. But until then, I want to say thank you guys for listening in, and we hope to see you guys next week. Peace.